Yeah, sorry about that. So hey guys, so this is Finance Meets Real Estate. We have Angel Williams here today. So she's gonna talk about her first deal actually, which I believe Angel you closed last month, right? End of last month.
We closed the 17th of December.
Yep, that's great. Congratulations. And so Angel has experience in single family, some multifamily investing, and now that this is her first syndication as well. And she's the founder of Warren Capital, and she also hosts a podcast, The Academy Presents, right?
Absolutely.
So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to you, Angel, and I'm really happy to have you here. I'm very interested to hear about your experience so far, and and I'm sure everybody else is as well. So I will pass it on to you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them on the chat or just speak up. We're doing a more like conversational format. So yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right. So I'm Angel. I am the face of our educational platform, which is the Academy Presents Real Estate Investing Rocks. We have our podcast. We do have a community on our website, and I can put that in the chat. If you give me just a little bit, I'll get it over there. We have been in real estate for 17, 18 years. That's my husband and I. And then the other cool thing was that we both grew up in families that invested in real estate. So we actually never had a conversation about, hey, do you want to get into real estate? We just always knew. The very first house we bought when we were in our early 20s, we knew that was going to be our first rental. And that's what happened. So in 2007, that very first house that we bought became our first rental. So we started off on that residential side. We currently have, oh goodness, we've got 5 single family homes that are rented. We have a 6th single family home that needs to be demolished and have something else rebuilt on that little plot of land there. And then we've got a quad and a couple of duplexes. We've got some investment dollars in oil and gas. And then we're kind of into some watches and stuff, but because we wear them, they're not really investment. But we're kind of all over the place as far as where we put our dollars. We did enter into the active side of the multifamily space. I guess really it started this past summer. So we was probably before that, goodness. So in probably February or March, my husband has Second Set of Eyes, which is it's an underwriting company where he will underwrite your deals for you if you don't have an underwriter, or if you need someone to check your numbers. That's something that he does. He loves underwriting. He loves numbers. I don't really understand that, but he is super into numbers, and he will absolutely do that for you. So I will also make sure to get that into the chat as well, like how you can get a hold of him. But I guess it was about March when a property came our way and someone was like, hey, can you look over this for us? And so Jason did. And then we didn't hear anything back. And then probably June or July of last year, that exact same property came back to us in one of those SMS, like a text blast from a broker. And I was like, hey, that's here where we live. And I was like, at that point, it was like, I had never really called a broker or talked to a broker or anything. And I was like, well, heck, I'm just going to call. So I called, and the guy that picked up didn't realize that there was even anyone on the phone line. And his earbuds were like around his neck. So I'm like screaming, hello. And he finally picked up and he was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there was anybody here. And so that was how we actually got into the property, was by me calling a broker. And you're going to hear from mentors and coaches, don't ever call a broker until you practiced. I had never practiced. I had never really called anybody. I just did it. And when he was like, well, do you want to set up a time to visit the property? And I was like, I don't know. I guess pencil us in. And I literally told him, I'm like, if I don't call you back, we'll be there. But it was not my most professional of moments. But we still got in to tour the property and we were there. I want to say I showed up in our Jeep and my husband showed up in his work truck. And while we were there, the broker was like, "Oh my gosh, is this your Jeep?" And we were like, "Well, yeah." Turned out the broker liked to go off-roading. So we set up a weekend for all of us to go off-roading together. And that was how we established a relationship with a broker. So number one, find out what your broker likes. Find out, or the broker likes, find out something they're interested in and try and like figure out a way to make that happen for you and for your GP team. Because I really believe that having that relationship with the broker was one of the things that helped us get the deal. So
if I may interject, did you guys do any like direct to owner or other campaigns before that to, for other properties, let's say?
It was the second time we had ever done an LOI was on this property. The first time was to a mom and pop establishment here in town as well. And honestly, we did the LOI, we did everything the way that you're taught. And they were like, "This isn't how it goes. We need the contract, we need the LOI, we need all of this stuff at the same time." We were like, "No, that's not how it works." But that one, we offered, oh goodness, they were wanting 2.2. And I think we offered 1.7 and they turned us down. And a friend of mine that's a GC had walked it with me, and there was about $750,000 in deferred maintenance alone. And so we offered based on that kind of riding in the background, and they turned us down. And from what I understand, that particular property just sold maybe last month for 2.3. So someone did offer, but they had also just replaced the roof. And they did something else too. It was the roof was replaced and one of the other biggies. And the other thing too is it's in a historical district. So it's a 1960s build, that particular property. And we knew that as soon as they pulled the roof, they were going to have to bring it to code. So the roof alone was going to be $250,000. So knowing that, that was another reason why we offered the way we did. But we're in Wichita Falls, and Wichita Falls is not huge and people talk. And so we've heard some other stories since then, and I'm not going to get into all that, but, it was probably a good thing that we didn't have our LOI accepted.
The property that you closed on, so was it, so if you want to go on the details, like let's say how many units and what was the purchase price and like what
Absolutely.
kind of value add are you guys looking to execute? Like what value are you expecting at exit and things like that?
Oh, for sure. All right. So the property that we just purchased, it's 72 units. And it's right on the edge of Wichita Falls. So we've got Wichita Falls, we've got Iowa Park, Burke Burnett, kind of some little towns on the outside. And the property is in Iowa Park, which is like right on the edge of Wichita Falls. And the thing is, people who live in Iowa Park, you're born in Iowa Park, you stay in Iowa Park, they are a very proud community. And so we have a very stable population. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so that's a really good thing. And the thing we also love about it is we have 4 single families here, and our single family homes rarely go empty. So it's really cool to have that kind of a knowledge too, and have that knowledge base to grow on, to know how things are going to work and how things are going to operate. So we're really happy with it. And the other thing we're looking at now, and this is something that you can kind of come across when you're getting into a property, is in your business plan, you have to give like a schedule of when you think CapEx is going to happen. So we had our CapEx schedule, our CapEx expectations. Well, in the past couple of weeks, well, I guess let me back up. In November, we had a huge hailstorm. Now we're in Tornado Alley, but hailstorms in November are not the norm. And so in November, we were like, holy night, we need to get covered parking. Then here in the last couple of weeks, we've literally had 80-degree days followed by snowfall in the evening. So we have these huge disparities in what's going on in temperature. And so I really feel like what has happened is we've needed to change up some of the scheduling to where, yes, the covered parking is still important, but I think maybe we also need to be looking at anything plumbing that might be coming up too. Because when you go from, 80-degree day temps to freezing temps at night, you've got a lot of stuff going on with your plumbing and with your piping. And so I think we need to be ready to change up the CapEx scheduling if necessary. And I think that when you're creating your business plans and you're getting ready to get your business plan going for your multifamily property, and your lender is going to want to know what your schedule is going to be, you need to have some cushion built in there to be able to kind of reorder if necessary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, got it. But let's say just high level, like what the purchase price was it?
We were able to get it for 5 million. So
5
about
million.
70,000 a door.
70K a door. Okay. And then you're looking at what kind of improvement in value that you guys are trying to achieve over what period?
We're looking at probably 18-ish months to be able to do the covered parking, to be able to do any kind of plumbing upgrades that need to be taken care of. We're also going to be pulling up all of the units minus say like 5 to 10 into upgrades, so that when the business plan is done, we have more units that are ready to be upgraded so that the next person that comes in gets a lot of meat on the bone. And so this is one of those things that you don't hear a lot about, or at least I never really did. So when you purchase your multifamily property, you want to be thinking about the next purchaser when you're thinking of things. So currently the property, everything has been upgraded. So we have premiums, we have the mid-grade, we have low grade. And then there's probably 5 or 10 that haven't had any of the upgrades at all. So they're sitting at that low tier. So the original idea was that we would take those 10 at the end and bump them all the way up to premium. So then you've got at least 60 units that need to be upgraded at the end of the business plan. And that becomes really important because that puts the meat on the bone for the next buyer. So you want to be thinking about that.
Would you say that if you were to kind of like squeeze out all the juice, so to say, from the property, then that's going to make it unsellable, and you kind of want to do it, let's say, to 90% of that, or is that kind of the mental optimization you're thinking of there?
So we were told by more than a couple of people that we were purchasing during the hardest phase because there wasn't a lot of upgrades to do. So we purchased kind of at the end. And so we focused a lot on exterior upgrades, i.e. the covered parking, and then a few things to do interior wise, a dog park, maybe looking at the playground, but a lot of exterior. So by having a lot of upgrades available to do, I think it's going to make it much more marketable for the next purchaser.
Okay, understood. But are you looking at like certain improvement in the rents that you can achieve with the exterior and like partial interior?
Yes. So by doing the covered parking, we're going to be able to get a bump for each of those covered parking spots. Because if you think about it, like what's the most expensive thing that someone living in an apartment is going to own? It's likely going to be their vehicle. So by offering protection for their most costly asset, we are able to pull a premium off of that because the vehicle is so important.
Makes sense. And okay, yeah, we have a question on the chat. Actually.
I know, I was looking at it too. Can you explain why your lender cared about your CapEx? Okay, so there's 2 different kinds of loans there, Aaron. You can do a bridge or you can do agency. Now, this becomes important because with your bridge loan, they're going to cover part of your CapEx. Usually, not always, but usually they're going to cover at least a portion of the CapEx. Because they're covering a portion of the CapEx, they want to know what the CapEx is. Now, your other thing is when you're on an agency, which is your Fannie and Freddie, they still want to know what you're going to be doing to upgrade the property, because they want to make sure that they're loaning on a viable asset. They're loaning for a good reason. And they don't want to loan if they don't have good, if they're not operating in good faith that you're going to be upgrading the property. So that's why they want to know what the CapEx schedule is, and they're also going to hold you to it. So if you're not doing the upgrades that you said you were going to do, that could potentially get you on a watch list. So if you've heard of like an A check, or the A check is I think the A check is Freddie, and then Fannie has their own watch list. Now there's not a crossover between the two, but you don't want to get on a watch list. Because if you get on a watch list with either one, you're not going to be able to get a loan with that agency until you've cleared yourself off the watch list.
So you guys did that's a bridge financing.
Yes, so we did a bridge. And for those of you on here, you may have never heard of a company called Lima One, but Lima One is the reason that we closed this year. So just kind of keep them in the back of your mind. I can make intros if you need.
So yeah, so some of our audience, so Lima One Capital, they are an asset-based lender, right? So asset-based lending has been developing a lot in the US with like Finance of America commercial, like doing like an SPAC IPO last year, I guess is one example. Right. So they have kind of like entered the market more, like offering like better terms, like rental loans, etc. And they're more in the residential space, but I believe more recently they've been getting into the commercial one as well. So it sounds like that's something that you guys did.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, we were to the point where we didn't think it was going to happen. So it's it's rocky. It's not fun. When you, well, and I'll just kind of put this out there too, get your lending in place before you do your webinar. So I'm just gonna put that out there. We thought we had our lending secured, did our webinar, and didn't have our lending secured. So you want to make sure that you've got that down. How do you find and choose your investors? Oh, Andy. Honestly, this go round, it was a lot of family and friends. I am our relationships person. I talk to everybody, anybody. I do a lot of talking. It's kind of my thing. And so we just talked to everybody we knew. In our family, so like Jason's mom, sister, brother-in-law, like family alone, we put in over $250,000 of our own. Then it came to friends that we had. So we have some friends that are medical, they're in the medical field. We've got friends in the legal field. And then we just have friends that they've been military, they've got their military funds, and the military has like a 401, but it's not called a 401. It's a different kind of numbering system, but they also have retirement accounts that they can invest with. So there's basically, I guess what I'm saying is, don't not think that somebody can be an investor because of the kind of job they have. Oh, it's called a TSP for the military. Thank you, Nelson. But they can invest too. So everybody that is around you is a potential investor. And just think of it that way. Think of like every single person that you could possibly talk to could be an investor. And I say that because my husband and I were in Bass Pro, and I'm assuming Bass Pro is nationwide. It's like an REI, but for fishermen, kind of.
Just Angel, just to clarify, when you say like everybody, that's because that's the type of securities offering that you guys are doing. That allows both accredited and non-accredited.
Yes, so that's the 506B. So you have to have a relationship. And the reason why I bring up this story is because we're talking to this guy at the counter there in Bass Pro, and he starts talking to me about REITs. Because I asked him, I said, so do you invest? Are you an investor? And he's like, oh, I invest in these things called REITs. I was like, you invest in REITs? Random guy, retiree, working at the gun counter of a Bass Pro. And he and I start having a conversation about real estate. And by the end of it, we had exchanged cards, cell phone numbers, and I still talk to him. Will he be an investor at some point? Maybe, but don't not think that somebody can be an investor based on where you're seeing them work or where you've met them, because you just never know. So I'm just putting that one out there too. Don't discredit someone because of what they're doing.
Yep, yeah, completely agree. And actually, just to mention, since I mean, to some people, like in syndication, there are a lot of tax benefits, right? So I know you did a cost segregation study on your deal you're doing right now. So you mentioned to me like some of the different buckets for, you know, like tax buckets for like asset segregation, right? So do you want to talk about this a little bit?
So I can. So a lot of people will get you into the deal based on the fact that there's a cost seg. And I actually see someone in our group right now that has very strong feelings about the cost seg, Charles, because he'll tell you that on that first one, the cost seg doesn't really matter. And you're probably thinking, what? How in the world does that work, right? Because like for our deal, say you put in 100,000, there's like, I think it's just under 50,000 comes back on the depreciation. And you're not going to make that much in year one anyway. So you're going to have some rollover, and you can roll over for, I want to say 5 years, you can roll over the excess. But if you're not in a position where you can actually capitalize on that rollover, or you can capitalize on what's coming back to you in that first year, the cost seg and depreciation shouldn't be what gets you into a deal. Which I know it sounds really weird. But I would say, and for me personally, all I ever used to look at, and don't laugh, don't call me out on some, but the only thing I ever looked at was the equity multiple. Because to me, the equity multiple told me everything I needed to know. So if you're kind of wondering how the heck is that?
I agree. So equity multiple, right? Sort of like the end to end, like for the period, for the holding period, like how many times essentially you get your return, you know, how many times you get your initial investment. So what are you guys looking at in terms of equity multiple here?
Okay, so in Nelson's asking the same thing. When I'm looking at the equity multiple, I'm looking at what is the double up. And again, that's just kind of layman's terms. How long will it take for me to double my money? And for me, when I'm looking at that equity multiple, it also gives me an idea of what the average return is. So if you are looking at a 2x equity multiple and you're looking at a 5-year hold, that tells me my average return is like 20% a year. Now, if you're trying to use that to look at the IRR is way more complicated, because you're also looking at the time value of money, and you're looking at all of these other factors that play in there. So to me, I mean, IRR, great, it's a number, but it's really just arbitrary. It's just a number. Whereas when I'm looking at the equity multiple and I'm in my mind thinking, okay, if this is a 5-year hold, what am I looking at in my yearly return? To me, that gives me like actual numbers to work with that I can understand.
I agree. Yeah, it's a much more intuitive thing, right? I mean, IRR, I don't think too many people's brains can process some of the changes in IRR that happen with like very small tweaks and so forth. So I agree. So you're saying, so, okay, so what is your period to double up on this deal? Let's say, is it like 5 years? What are you guys targeting?
So ours is 2.25. We're looking at a 7-year hold. But again, we come from the residential side. Why is that so important? Because a lot of your residential people are buy and hold people. So a long hold doesn't scare us, because that's what we're used to. And so you just kind of have to think of those things when you're dealing in, when you're looking at that equity multiple and you're looking at the hold and you're trying to make those kinds of calculations in your head. Another thing you might see too, especially with someone coming from the residential side, is we're looking for infinite returns. And I had never heard anyone talk about infinite returns until about, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. I was listening to a guy that invests in El Paso, and he was talking about infinite returns. It was oh goodness, now I'm not going to remember his name. I'll think of it. I'll leave it going in the back of my head and I'll come up with his name. But basically what you're doing is you're cash out refining every chance you get. And every time you have a big capital event like that, you can turn around and give big chunks of change back to your investors.
Mhm.
So in an infinite return model, it basically means that none of your initial investment is still in the deal. So all of our single families are infinite returns.
Mhm.
None of our initial investment dollars are still in those deals. We've cash out refied them enough to where nothing we have of our original money is in them. So they're earning money strictly on bank funds. And so that's the infinite return model. And we
Here,
want to pull
like,
that into multifamily.
Angel, so that's, I mean, that's in part achieved with, okay, kind of like having an equity gain strategy within fairly early in the deal, let's say 6 months to 12 months, or, or to 18 months or something like that. But also having the cost segregation study, like sort of returning capital. And so how is, if you want to kind of use an example here for that, like how is that, working out in terms of the cost seg and all else?
So generally on your cost seg, you're going to be looking at about a 30% depreciation. And that's kind of like the industry standard. You're looking at about 30%. I think we are currently sitting at 38. The site visit is on the 6th, and we might be able to get up over 40. The reason why that is important
Wait,
is
so
because
30% depreciation. Sorry, Angel. So 30% depreciation, you mean what exactly? So like a 30% of what is you're going to return in terms of that? I assume like the bonus depreciation, right? The advanced schedule depreciation that associates to the cost seg.
yeah, so basically that's over the lifetime of the property. So you're going to have a recapture on the sale. And that's another thing I want to kind of bring up too, is you're going to hear tidbits from all sorts of different people. And just know that on the sale, you're going to have some recapture of the benefit that you're going to get in your property year one. But the thing about that is $1 today is worth more than $1 5 years from now. So I'd rather deduct my $1 today than not have to claim the recapture 5 years from now. So does that make sense? I'm hoping that makes sense to everyone. Oh, there's lots of stuff here too. Can you give an example of the equity multiple with a deal or with the 72? Okay. So on our deal, and Nelson, I'm backing up a little bit to you. We're looking at a 2.25. Let's just call it a 2. So if it were a 2 over 5 years, you're looking at an average return of 20% per year. So that would mean that if I put, if I put 100,000 in, I'm looking at 20% back on that 100,000 every year on average. So that by the end of the 5 years, with the cash flow, the capital events, and everything that's in that, I'm going to go from 100 to 200.
Mm. Now, does that also include if you throw a refinance in there as well?
No, so your refis are your capital events.
Right.
Yeah, so most of those are going to be included. Now, not everybody includes the refi. They do it as a bonus. So like when we did a bridge and then we felt like we had to include the refi, we had some people call us out. They were like, why are you including the refi? That's supposed to be a bonus. But again, first time, right? We didn't know. We were like, well, we have to because we only get 2 years and we have 1 year extensions. And so we thought we had to include it. And they were like, no, you just count it as a 4-year hold. So it was kind of neat.
I mean, generally speaking, if I might add, Angel, I feel
Thank
like
you, Angel.
equity multiple is more like, and also at least my understanding, let me know if you agree, it's kind of more like end-to-end, measure. So, I mean, first, it's like really intuitive and kind of, easy to understand because it's just like how many times you get your initial investment. But second, it doesn't, or it ought to not, take into account like all those in-between events. It doesn't really care as to whether you do even a cost seg It doesn't care about any of that. At the time you are already selling the deal, it's more like, okay, what you purchase, what is your initial investment, reflective of your leverage, etc., and then what's your sale. So it's, I feel like kind of an end-to-end measure, right? It's not over your holding period. If you refi it before that, that's going to raise your IRR. It's not going to raise your equity multiple. If you did a cost seg before that, it's going to raise your IRR. It's not going to raise your equity multiple.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to play with the numbers too. My husband is our underwriter, so he knows way more about those numbers and stuff than I do. But he's a big time introvert and wouldn't hop on the call. So so now I'm here.
But he's also smart. That's why he married you.
Oh, you are so sweet. Yes, that is absolutely 100% correct.
And you can feel free and tell him that it was this podcast that said that to him.
I will absolutely 100% remember that, Mr. Nelson.
He's a thermal engineer, right? I believe.
He's a chemical engineer. He had his PhD when he was 26.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool.
So numbers are absolutely his thing. He actually created our whole spreadsheet and he coded all the macros and it's his thing. So I trust his numbers 100%. I wanted to back up to Nelson, you talk a little bit about the rule of 72. And that rule
Right.
of 72 just says that if you take the interest rate and 72 and you divide it out, it'll let you know how long it's going to take to double up. The reason why it's different in multifamily is because it's not just based on the interest rate.
Okay. All right. Well, the interest rate, I guess you figure out, what's your, like when you said, well, if I double my money in 5 years, I know I'm making 20% a year. So you figure out, okay, I'm making 20. It's kind of intuitive, just like Stepan was saying.
Yeah. So like if you took 72 and divided it by the 20, then you're going to get about the 5, right? So it's a similar kind of thing. It's just that in multifamily versus say residential or something where you're only getting a flat interest rate, there are so many more ways to affect what the return is going to be in multifamily. It's not a given. You get to have effect on it.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, let's see. How did I learn how to structure deals, loan, CapEx? By listening to people. Andy, my degree is in economics. I know how to go off of people's incentives. But as far as like learning how to structure deals, I think a lot of that happens just because of necessity. We looked at a few different options because again, so we got under contract in August. So when you see people say, hey, we're under contract, hey, we're closed, and it's like 3 weeks later, that's not the norm. It is really very normal for a deal to take a lot of time. And so we ran through all of these scenarios and we looked at potentially doing like a full fund through investors. We looked at doing it that way. We looked at hard money. We looked at private money. We looked at so many different options because like K Trevor down there at the bottom on my screen will tell you it's we got on lots of buses. We were ready to go with the deal. We'd get on the bus and things would just get crazy and the bus didn't make it to its destination and we'd have to get on another bus. And so I think that part of learning how to structure the deal was just by necessity because it was like, well, crap, this one isn't going to work out. What do we need to try now? And so it was running through all of these different scenarios just to get this thing to the finish line. Because at the end of the day, and this comes straight from our lawyer, nobody is going to remember how much you cried, how much you yelled, screamed, or anything else, how hard it was for you. They're going to remember, did you close or not? And so you get real creative when the stuff is hitting the fan. But other than that, it's just, you talk to lots of people and lots of people go through some serious heartache getting a deal to the finish line. And people don't usually talk about it. So you just have to ask. So hopefully that answers. Charles was saying that he's seeing equity multiples 1.8 to 2.1. That's why I usually, in my mind, I'm looking for a 2x. Does the cost seg decrease the property hold time? So the hold time can be affected by a lot of things. I've seen people turn a property in 18 months because the numbers made sense. And they were seeing numbers that were higher than their projection over the entire hold time. And so they flip it earlier than what their projected hold time was in the beginning. So it really just depends on what's going on with the numbers and whether or not it makes sense to go ahead and sell prior to the end of your business plan.
Thank you.
All right. Charles is saying he sees bonus depreciation 70 to 95. That's awesome.
Hey, Angel, quick question, going back to my original one. On the cost segregation, so you've got that recapture at the end, right? So, I mean, what have you noticed being the difference in the return with the recapture part? Because it's basically you're paying more taxes, from what I understand, right?
So there's ways around it.
Okay, all right.
And I actually had this conversation with Charles because what I had heard was that if you've got, say you put 50,000 into a deal, and it's at its turn. So you're 3, 5, 7, whatever you're in, you're at its turn, that you can't just back that up with another $50,000 investment. You need to back that up with a $100,000 investment to cancel out the gains.
Could you explain that? Could you?
Well, think about it. If you are figuring on a double up,
Right. So your 50 went to 100.
so you can't just follow that up with another $50,000 investment to cancel it out. You got to follow it up with a 100.
Now, when you say cancel it out, cancel out the tax, what are we talking about canceling out?
Yeah, cancel out the tax. So, and Charles has his hand up. I'm going to let him explain this because he's done like 50 something deals as a serial passive investor.
Okay.
Charles, do you want to better explain what I'm trying to explain?
Yeah, and it's painful right now because as the bonus depreciation bleeds off, it's going to get harder and harder to not hit some of the recapture. But essentially realize that your capital gain at the sale is the difference between the capital count on your last K1 and what you sell it for. So if we can put in 100 rather than 50, it makes it a little easier on the math. So you put in 100. At the end of 5 years, your capital account's probably down in the 20s, maybe 25, because they've paid you some money and you got some depreciation over time. Typically the bonus depreciation right up front. So now you sell this thing for 200. The whole property goes for something, but your cut's 200. So your capital gain on the thing is 180 or 170, depending on which number we're talking about there. So you got a lot more capital gain on the thing. But if it was your first deal, now you've got the depreciation you had on that deal, which was probably in the neighborhood of 50, assuming you had the bonus depreciation this year, last year, whatever. And so that 50 tends to, because you got to carry it forward until now, and it will carry forward forever, by the way. You don't want it to, but it will. And so at the time you sell a property, that releases the gains, release the losses, and the losses count against the gains. So you took the 50 off of the 180, so you only had 120 in gains, but you were smart enough to then invest in another property. The problem being is that the bonus depreciation is gone, so you really can't get a huge amount. So you're going to have depreciation off of a couple of properties perhaps now to make that whole thing disappear. So your capital gains, you will end up probably recapturing in the next few years, which goes up to 25%. But it doesn't really exceed, as far as I can tell, it doesn't exceed your actual normal tax rate. So if you keep your taxes reasonable, it stays down pretty low. So, but you know, hell, we make a gain, we pay a tax.
So Charles, like, thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great, great summary right there. And to just like for our audience, like, so what you're saying is, okay, so if you start with 100,000 bonds, okay, then you have like all your, cash flows, etc., and you have like your bonus depreciation. So let's say we can say that bonus depreciation kind of really stretches your argument is your bonus depreciation stretches your gain a lot at the sale. And kind of you have that as a taxable gain, and then you need to work it out for your overall tax, like be it like recapture over several years or sort of like overall tax minimization, etc. So there is an effect to bonus depreciation improving your IRR. Let's say you're moving your cash flow forward, but then over the period of the deal, if it's a shorter term or even a 5-year deal, it kind of ends up resulting in a potentially higher tax bill unless you sort it out with all your other properties, etc.
Yes.
Is that kind of some of your argument, or
that's pretty much it. But if I go back a few years, where I bought one 5 years ago and it sold at the end of last year, got several of those, by the way. Because this year I can still do bonus depreciation, I'm going to make that disappear in a snap. So I will have no recapture. But I'm setting myself up to fail because in 4 years, when we sell this property that I just bought, I'm going to have a ton of gain because the depreciation has already been used up, and I will end up having a large capital gain, and I'll end up investing as much as I can to overcome it. But all I'm doing is kicking the can down the road. So at some point, I'm either going to die, there's a side effect to that, or I'm going to pay that tax.
Yeah, makes sense.
Somebody's going to pay the tax.
No, you die, step up in basis, it's gone. Yeah, that's great. Now, unless
well, but I thought that was one of the items that was up for change.
It is up, but nothing passed.
Okay.
So, as long as we continue to have step up in basis, which is actually a very reasonable thing. You can argue over several pieces, but they all play together. It's stupid to not have the step up in taxes because you also pay your inheritance tax, which is what relates to that. So anyway, but as long as you have the step up in basis, as long as you don't mind dying, you don't have to pay the tax.
Yikes.
Okay, I'll shut up.
No, we're good. So I guess part 2 on the cost seg, that one is being phased out as well. So that's on that. I think that's where I'm getting the 5-year from, because that's on a 5-year phase out, right? So basically what that means is you get your bonus depreciation now, but it's going to phase out to where you can no longer get that. And so you can't cancel out the same way.
You still have depreciation. It's just not bonus depreciation. So you're stuck with the 3%, divide by 27.5, whatever it is, in time. But you can still do a cost seg. So you still front load your taxes. You just can't pull it to day one. So instead of doing like a 3%, you're probably going to get it down to 5 or 6% rather than what I'm seeing is 50, 80, 90%. I've even seen some over 100, which is, it's sort of cool. You might say, well, how the heck do you get over 100? Well, you get the depreciation over the part the bank is investing in. So if you got an 80-20 deal with the bank, that just says that there's enough depreciation that when it all slides over to the 20% that you and the rest of investors own, it comes out to be a larger amount than your investment today. But that's not going to keep up past this year. Next year, it'll be 80%. You'll only get 80% of it up front.
Due to leverage, basically.
Charles. Yeah, it's essentially a benefit of leverage.
Indirect, yeah. But then, so, the change that you guys are talking about, is it sort of removing just the bonus depreciation component of cost segregation, right? And then all the bucketing stays, but it's really bonus depreciation that's been this kind of enormously.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it basically means that your 5-year bucket, you actually have to wait 5 years. Your 10-year bucket, you actually have to wait 10 years. So instead of being able to pull the 5, 10, 15 up to day one.
Yeah,
but you get the cost seg because it's able to pull things into 5 years rather than doing the entire building at 27.5. So it's a benefit, but it's not what it was. But this has only been going on for 4 or 5 years now. So it's not like we're getting screwed by it going away, other than it's going to be a real shock for us who have investments and have all this recapture coming down the line at us in the future. But you know,
That's what is the date? Do you guys know? Like, I mean, when is it proposed, the change?
it changes at
forward.
the end of this year. We go from 100% bonus depreciation to 80%, then it drops to 60, and I can't 60, 40, 20 zip. And you know, the zip will be a shock when you sell your property, but yeah, that's life. Death and taxes.
So long as people know going into it. So I think that's one of the other reasons why it is so important for all of us to share this information that we have. Because if it's a newbie investor coming in that sees this K1 that's negative K1 year one, awesome, and doesn't understand that that's not always going to be the way it is. I think it's a bigger shock for someone like that. So I think it is super important that we all share all that we know, because each one of us knows something different, right? So if we're all sharing the goods and the bads, then people are going to get a much more realistic view and a realistic picture of where things are going with these investments and multifamily and just how it can play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Patrick is asking actually on the chat, so can you explain in what scenario will you do a refinance? And I guess it's a general question for even residential, but let's say for a commercial property like that, what's the typical refinance for a syndicate?
So for us, Patrick, for us on our bridge, we get 2 years interest only. And then we have 2 1-year renewables. So it's a 4-year total, 2 years on the first, and then 1 year and 1 year interest only. So we're going to be trying to refi as soon as our 12-month is up, because the reason why I'm saying the 12 months is because a lot of your bridge loans say, regardless of when you refi, if you're in the first 12 months, you still owe 12 months of payments. So generally people wait to month 13 to 18 to do that first refi, if it makes sense to do the refi then. But again, it goes back to the numbers, and does it make sense to refi it at month 13 to 18? Does it make more sense to refi at month 36? Where does it make sense in the numbers? And this is one of those times when I wish my husband was on here, because he has run a ton of scenarios at all different months, and he can tell you exactly what month looks best for us right now based on where interest rates and NOI and all of those things are playing, and how those change as, you know, rents bump, if rents don't bump, if other things occur. So there's so many different variables in there, but there's not just I don't think there's not a hard rule that says, hey, we're going to refi at month 19. You're constantly looking at the numbers.
It also, I guess, depends on the initial financing, because you guys have a bridge, so it's kind of pretty much assumed to refi out of it. Like, what's the pricing you were able to get, if that's not a secret?
Oh no, we got 5.99.
5.99. Okay, that's good.
When we were looking at agency bridge, we were looking at 6 1/4 and 6 1/2. So 5.99 looked real beautiful.
Yep. That's great for a bridge, right? And they give you like how much in capex, you know, budgets, let's say, or like financing?
We got, I want to say it was 75 LTC. And the difference there with it being LTC is that that's where that part of the capex was covered, because it was loan to cost, not loan to value. What's the key indicator of the time you should refi? Ooh, I don't really know. I can tell you what it would be in. Oh, Charles has got his hand up. I'm gonna let Charles take this one, because I can tell you about it in a residential, but.
Okay, I've been in a refi or a supplemental loan, essentially the same thing, in 4, maybe 5 situations. Let's say you're an angel and you make your property value kicks up to maybe 75, 80% higher than what it was when you bought it. Now you got a lot of equity in the building, and you go, if I refi at a good time and the loan works for that, I can hand back 60% of the money back to my investors. They're going to be super happy, because now they're in at 40% versus the 100% they were, and they go and reinvest that in some other deal. So they're just peachy keen about that. The cost of that refi doesn't usually eat up all of the increased profits. So sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And so now you're paying them about the same rate. And so what used to be an 8% cash on cash return turns into a 15, 18, 25. I've even had one that went up to 45, and now he's paid me all the money back. So I can't even do the math on how much my cash on cash is at this point. But doing a refi is what you want. It is only typically you'd have to do it on a bridge loan when you run out of loan, but on a deal where you do it for your advantage to your investors, you have a large increase in the value and you can hand them back money, and everybody's just spiffy happy about a thing like that. I will say that I've got one that did it at 24%, and I honestly don't think it was worth it. And then I've had one do it at 96%, I think it was. That one was well worth it. So, it's different. One was at 76%, and I like that one too. So, it's just some deals go that way, some deals don't.
Yeah, well, that does make sense when you think about it that way, because I'm thinking about it on the residential side. When we've done a cash out refi, we do it because we're going to get back all of our investment money. Plus, usually we get back enough to buy another property. And so that's what we're thinking. We're thinking, okay, are we going to think of it like $100,000 home? Are we going to get our 20 that we put in? Yes. Are we going to get 20 to 25 more to put into the next property? Yes. If both of those are yeses, it makes sense to do it. Which it sounds like that's very similar in the multifamily space as well. I mean, are you going to make back enough to pay back your investors? So that's like that first 20,000. And are you going to be able to roll it into something else? And maybe with multifamily, you're not thinking about the roll into something else, but just making sure that you're getting investors back everything. Oh, those two questions. Yes. So from the residential standpoint, if it's a $100,000 home, you got to put 20,000 in, right? Because you got to put 20% in. So on a cash out refi, my first question is, am I getting back that 20,000? And then my second question is, am I going to get an additional 20 to 25 to roll into my next property? So I don't know what the percentages play out to, but on that cash out refi, I need to be pulling probably 40 to 50,000 out to be able to get my money back for the infinite return and roll into the next property. So does that make sense?
One small extra piece, and yours is completely right, but typically on everyone I've seen, they don't give back all the money. They hold back some, 5, 10, 15% of what they refi, so they can continue to improve the property and continue to raise rents, NOI, make me money. I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, and that goes into, if you've ever seen on that underwriting where it's about working capital, there's an amount per unit in working capital, and that's where you're able to make some of those changes. And it kind of does some CYA too. If something big comes up, you've got a little bit of money there that you can play with to take care of something that comes up that maybe wasn't necessarily thought of. If that's, a drain line, or like in this past February when all the stuff got crazy here in Texas, maybe you use some of that for those, you use those funds to cover some of the repairs that maybe weren't covered by insurance. So there's a lot of pieces in multifamily that you don't have in residential that give you a little bit more cushion and playability also. Sorry, I'm going through the questions and making sure I think
If you
we hit
guys
them all.
go ahead, I'm not sure if
I'm not seeing any new ones. I think we hit them all. If we didn't answer a
we
question,
did. We didn't.
retype.
If you guys wanna speak up, feel free to actually. And I mean, I agree on. I guess refi is it's kind of like a timing thing. If you wanna stretch cash on cash or IRR, that's usually. If one is indifferent to timing, then obviously then you don't want to spend the money for the refi, but you can you can greatly boost cash on cash return, right? To a point of, to your earlier point, Angel, right? To a point of infinite at some time. And it's not really, I mean, I think that's the concept of infinite return, right? Because you mentioned, Angel, you heard about it like some time ago, let's say like 2 years ago or something like that, right? I mean, it's not really time zero infinite, right? It's not nobody does that. It's more like if you can do it within 6 months or a year or something like that, okay, then that's when it's infinite. It's like time 1 infinite kind of thing. But it's not time 5, so that's good. It's good enough, between.
Well, and the longer your hold, the longer the equity multiple. And that one can seem weird to people, because
The larger the equity multiple, yeah.
and you also have to think about it in terms of like nominal versus real dollars.
Mhm.
Because if the equity multiple is 10, great. But what's my hold? If my hold is 20 years to get to an equity multiple of 10, what am I really increasing in real terms? And the reason why I make the distinction between real and nominal is because your dollar is losing about 3% value every year on average. So my dollar today is worth a whole heck of a lot more than my dollar 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And so that equity multiple could look amazing, but if the hold is crazy long, then I need to be thinking about it in terms of like, what's this really looking like in terms of real dollars versus nominal dollars? Whereas nominal dollars are just like the dollars you see in the bank. And real dollars is like, what can I really purchase? So if you've ever heard of like purchasing power parity, that sounds like a crazy big word. You might also hear it called Big Mac theory. I like the Big Mac theory a whole lot more. It's how much is a Big Mac here versus somewhere else.
Mhm.
So if I could buy a Big Mac here in my hometown for $2 and I go somewhere else and it's $3, then my real dollar value has decreased. And so that, that equity multiple can sound amazing if the hold period is super long, but you have to go back and think, okay, am I purchasing a Big Mac today or 20 years from now? And
then-
am I going to get a whole Big Mac or half a Big Mac?
Yeah. So then like Angel, like Patrick is asking, so let's say, how do you choose yourself, your hold period? Let's say like how do you choose how long to hold your properties?
So like I said, we come from residential. So we are buy and hold people. That's kind of like our model is just buy it and hold it. With us coming into the multifamily space, like the business plan we created for this property, I want to say is 5 to 7. If we knock out the business plan in 3 years and the numbers look great, then we turn it. Which is going to hurt because I'm a buy and hold person. I don't know how to do anything but buy and hold. And so it's going to be weird, but honestly, it just comes back down to the numbers. And do the numbers work at 3 years, at 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? Where do the numbers work best? And that's where you really want to make sure you have someone that has a good underwriting program and they've been working those scenarios out and they can plug those numbers into where they need to be to see at what point in time do the numbers work the best. And you really have to let the numbers dictate that. And again, coming from residential, that's hard because I will 100% tell you I can walk into a property and fall in love. And that sucks. You don't want to fall in love with a property. You want the numbers to do the talking.
What are your views on inflation now? I've heard like different, I guess different views a little bit from different investors.
So we are in inflation. There's no way that we cannot see inflation. And we're going to see a lot of inflation because if you think about it, and this is the way I explain it to my classes too. If you have 100 pieces of currency and the value of your currency is $100 or 100 units, and overnight you go from 100 pieces of currency to 200 pieces of currency, then each unit of currency is only worth 50 cents. It cuts the value in half. Well, we had a massive print of currency and it wasn't 50, what was it, 8% or something, but still, when you increase Milton Friedman, when you increase the pieces of currency, it has to decrease the value of each piece of currency. There's no way that it can't. And so if we go back to that idea of real versus nominal in the values of our dollars, if I know they're falling, it's going to take more pieces of currency to purchase that Big Mac that I was able to purchase yesterday for one piece of currency. So my real purchasing power is going down. Therefore, I am experiencing inflation. And there's no way around that.
Yep. It's like, I guess like Andrew, it's like Elon Musk, I saw like a reel, probably you guys have seen it on social media and other places, he has this thing where like one of the goals of electronic money, like things like Bitcoin, etc., is well to reduce the error of the big call it like database code money. So it's like it's this kind of error minimization of money printing is one of them. So that was like, that's an argument there. But you're absolutely right. It's going to be interesting to see how things develop in real estate.
My thing with crypto is still, it doesn't have an innate value. So it is still a fiat currency. People have this misnomer of an idea that when you can't make more of something, it's no longer a fiat currency. No, a fiat currency is any currency that does not have an innate value. Gold is not a fiat currency because gold has a value in and of itself. The dollar is worth $1 because we think it's worth $1. Therefore, it is a fiat currency.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know what to think about all the crypto. I haven't gotten into it because I don't understand it, and I refuse to invest in something I don't understand. And so if you are a crypto investor and you are laughing your tail off at me right now, more power to you. But for me, I don't really understand it. And so
how long would you expect like the current inflationary cycle to continue, I guess? No idea. I mean,
we just came out of the longest growth cycle ever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And again, everything I'm thinking is based on theory because my degree is, it's in economics, it's theory, right? I know what I think is going to happen. Can I give you timelines? Absolutely not. Because who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought that we would be moving so much faster now through social media and, electronic communication that we wouldn't see trade-offs like we were taught about that happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? But we're still seeing some of those trade-offs. And can you post? Oh, I teach micro and macroeconomics. So that's funny. But it's we just don't know. So there's actually a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. And we're taught about it. As inflation goes up, unemployment goes down. Well, we're hitting some pretty crazy inflation right now, and unemployment isn't really changing because we've got these other variables playing in. And my thought had always been that as communication becomes easier and we see more freedom of communication and openness in communication, that we would see a loss in these kinds of trade-offs. But that doesn't even seem to be what's going on now. It seems to be more that, and I actually read about it just the other day. Somebody posted that with the pandemic, people care so much more about their free time. And so now people are placing a different value on their hobbies and on their free time and what they do outside of work. Before, you had this backward bending J curve where people would work more hours for more dollars up to a point, and then it would fall off. And I think that there's been a shortening to that point where you fall off here in the last 2 years that we hadn't seen previously. And so that plays into that trade-off of unemployment and inflation. And there's just so many things playing into it now that I think we're going to see big changes, and that's going to change those timelines as well.
Mm-hmm. Last question we have on the chat from Andy is: will you be doing other asset classes like commercial? I mean, non-multifamily, I guess, retail, industrial.
I don't know. I have friends that do multi-use. So they'll do like lofts in the top and business in the bottom. So, maybe we have a friend that's purchasing a company here in town that it's straight industrial, and they're looking at making that kind of a purchase. And it's neat to be able to talk to him because the cost seg still exists, but it's so much different. And that was something else that we really learned about too, is when you're talking to plumbers and electricians and they're like, oh yes, we do residential and commercial. Yes, they do commercial, like big scale, like industrial facilities, like manufacturing facilities. When they think commercial, they don't think 100 units, they think one big massive unit. And so learning and seeing that other people view the same terminology in different ways, it really comes back to like my classes where I'm telling my students, write down your vocab. And they're like, what? That's childish. And I'm like, you need to know your vocabulary because what you think the word real means is maybe something different to an economist, or what you believe commercial means as a multifamily investor would be different to an electrician that is used to doing commercial in big scale. So a huge facility versus 100 or 200 units. So
I always feel that for this question with like commercial asset classes, I always feel like conceptually, if we have something where valuation is based on income, right? Like NOI, I feel that, okay, where we have the biggest volatility to income, and that's, probably the hospitality industry. So you can kind of tweak NOI the most. So I always feel that's one of the things that results in the biggest equity multiple, and, just conceptually. So that's kind of, we've seen it. I think there are some people like Mike Ely, et cetera, who do that. It doesn't come like then if you normalize by risk, maybe it's different, but just purely like where you can stretch NOI the most, okay, maybe that's one sector.
Well, and our friend that's buying
alternatives to multifamily, I mean, that's
our friend that's buying the facility here was talking about even inside the facility, you're buying hard and soft assets, because you're not just buying, it's a lot like multifamily. With multifamily, you're not just buying the units as residences. You're buying the residential units, but you're also buying the business of selling and renting those residential units. Well, in the commercial space, manufacturing or industrial, you're not just purchasing the building. You're purchasing the building. You're purchasing like if it has any kind of hydraulic lifts, or if it's doing like what are they called? The water cutters. I can't think of the like actual terminology for them, but they cut the like plates or whatever the pieces are with water. Hydro. I don't want to get it wrong. But you're purchasing those pieces as well as the business and the building. And so you're purchasing patents, or you're purchasing any of their code, any code that they've written or put together for how they're putting together something specific within the company. So you're purchasing all of these things. And so it's not just the building, but the cost seg piece of it is like the exterior and it's the interior pieces, but it doesn't necessarily look at the soft asset side of it, which is like the intellectual property pieces. So it's just a whole different beast. Like 5 months ago, when we first got into this property, I really thought I had a good idea of what I was doing. And doing this on the active side, I realized that I knew nothing. So it's every time you move into a different asset class, just realize you're going to know nothing and you're starting over from scratch.
great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Angel, for sharing your time and knowledge with us here today. What is the best way for people to reach to you?
Oh, I should have put that in there. I'll put in our website.
Mm-hmm.
So it is www.theacademypresents.com. And that is how you can get to our community. And that has, I just put it over here in the chat, that'll get you to like our podcast. And we do 2 summits a year, very similar to like what Dan Hanford does. We have, 40 plus speakers from across the nation that'll talk about their specific specialty in the real estate space, tips, pointers. We also have a live section that runs next to it that has like mini masterminds kind of with Q&A and all that's there. So you can get to that on our website. And I think there is a discovery like session where you can schedule a session with me or my husband. His company is on there, and just a little bit of everything. So, and we don't have anybody else helping us. It's just us. And so when somebody responds, it's actually us. We don't have somebody else doing it.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Angel. And thanks to everyone for joining us here today. Have a good night. Bye, guys.